Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join. Thank you all for who've joined so far, and we'll be right with you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We are so excited to have you here this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Emily Hoppus. I am a technical advisor at FHI 360 and the managing editor at the CTI Exchange. Happy almost World Contraception Day. We are celebrating World Contraception Day all week, which is on Friday. So thank you for joining us in celebration of that. I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce the Contraceptive Technology Innovation Exchange and do a few logistics before we hand it over to our panel. So for those of you who are new to the Contraceptive Technology Innovation Exchange or the CTI Exchange, we aim to strengthen the contraceptive R&D ecosystem through knowledge sharing and collaboration. And for those of you who are familiar, you should take a look at our new website because we just launched it this year after a year-long redesign last year. So we're very excited about all of our new resources and our website. So the CTI Exchange is a website, which is on the slide here. And we update news, events, opportunities, including job and funding opportunities weekly. We also have a contraceptive technology innovation tracker database, which provides detailed information about contraceptive leads and products currently in development. And it's searchable and filterable and really easy to use. And so you should also take a look at that. We also are on LinkedIn, and we just launched a LinkedIn group called the CTI Forum, and we would love all of you to join that group as well. And as I'm saying this, Nat is putting links in the chat so you can join, you can take a look at those. And then we also have a weekly newsletter called the Flash in 5 that highlights 5 things happening in the world of contraceptive R&D each week. It's a very short and easy to read newsletter, so we'd love for you to also subscribe to that. We also host events, including webinars and virtual panel discussions like the one today, and we attend major events and conferences. Our next one will be at the International Conference on Family Planning in Bogota, Colombia. So if you plan to attend that conference, please reach out. We would love to connect with you. And we would just love to connect with you in general. If you have opportunities, resources, news that you would like us to share, you can email us at the email address that Nat will be putting in the chat as well. But without further ado, we can start our panel's discussion today. So Nat, you can head to the next slide, which is the disclosure dilemma, when and how to go public in contraceptive innovation. And we're really excited about our panel today. We encourage you to take advantage of our time together and ask questions in the Q&A box and in the chat, whichever is easiest for you. We also have a few opportunities to be interactive and weigh in on some scenarios related to this topic. So we also encourage you to please participate in those scenarios. And to start us off today, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Andrée Sosler, who's a director of market development and product introduction at the Contraceptive Research Development and Introduction Division at FHI 360. So Andrée, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily, and big prize to anyone who can say that 3 times fast. That's a lot of contraception and introductions. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm so grateful to our 3 panelists who are here today. The topic today is one that is near and dear to my heart. I've thought about it a lot over the years and have had discussions with quite a few of you that I see have joined about this very question or these very questions. So I'm really excited for this conversation. So we are going to get started actually with a little bit of participation from you all, and we're going to test our technical chops here. We have a poll to see what you think. There's no absolute right or wrong answer to this, but it should be appearing on your screen, but I'll read it in case anyone doesn't have this access to the slides. So here's the question. You're working with a public health agency in a low-income country that's part of a multi-site trial for a new contraceptive implant. The agency reaches out asking for early access to trial data so they can begin shaping policy and preparing health systems. Your legal team is concerned that sharing data before peer-reviewed publication could violate confidentiality agreements and weaken IP protections. But they are facing pressure from local stakeholders and want to act quickly. How do you respond? So here are the 4 choices. You might not perfectly love any of them, but please pick the one you think is best. Share full data immediately. Provide a tailored summary with caveats. Wait until peer-reviewed publication, and decline due to legal and strategic risks. So, without further ado, please go ahead and vote. And I think we'll see the results of the poll popping up. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Seems to be a strong leaning towards provide a tailored summary with caveats. Great. Okay, well, we are going to move on and maybe hear from some of our colleagues about maybe some similar situations today. And as that comes up, we might prompt some discussion based on your own reflection here. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleagues here on the call. I'll start with Anita Garg. Anita is the Senior Director of Strategy and Commercial Relations at the Population Council's Center for Biomedical Research, where she leads strategic planning and global partnerships to support the Council's mission. Previously, Anita spent 16 years at the International Partnership for Microbicides, or IPM, managing the team that developed and commercialized the monthly dapivirine vaginal ring, the first long-acting HIV prevention product for women. Anita played a pivotal role in the successful acquisition and integration of IPM into the Population Council, a transition completed in 2022, at which point she assumed her current role. Thank you, Anita, for joining us. If you could, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about your organization and the products that you are developing.
Sure. Thank you so much, Andrée, and thank you to the CTI Exchange for having me be a part of today's panel. So as Andrée mentioned, I'm part of the Population Council Center for Biomedical Research, and we are based in New York City on the campus of Rockefeller University, but I work remotely from right outside of Washington, D.C. So the Council has a rich pipeline of biomedical products for sexual and reproductive health, but I'll just highlight a couple that are specific for contraception. For women, we are developing some new hormonal vaginal rings that build upon our approved 1-year contraceptive vaginal ring, Anovera. And these will be products that may have different hormones, different use durations, different side effect profiles, and ultimately potentially streamlined manufacturing, which might lead to wider availability of those products in different markets. For men, we are excited to be soon reporting on the phase 2b trial results of a male hormonal contraceptive gel that was developed in close collaboration with the NIH. And this is a gel that is applied by men daily to their skin and suppresses sperm production. In terms of multi-purpose prevention technologies, we have a couple combination contraceptive and STI prevention products that we are developing, one building off of our approved HIV prevention ring, the dapivirine vaginal ring. And finally, we are conducting early research on non-hormonal options, both for males and females, And this is an area we hope to build out, so open to partnerships in that area. So those are really the main contraceptive products that we're working on at the moment. Thanks, Andrée.
Thanks so much, Anita. It's great to hear so much about your very robust portfolio at the Population Council. Next, I'd like to introduce Akash Bakshi. Akash is the co-founder and CEO of YourChoice Therapeutics, a biotechnology company developing non-hormonal contraceptives for men and women. He previously served as CEO of, and I apologize, is it ANA or ANA Therapeutics?
It's ANA.
ANA Therapeutics, with a background in molecular biology and entrepreneurship. Bakshi has helped guide YourChoice from its origins in a UC Berkeley lab through the prestigious Y Combinator Accelerator, positioning it as a pioneer in modern contraceptive development. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your organization, Akash, and the products that you're developing.
Firstly, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you also for inviting me to be here with all of you. So my name is Akash, and I guess I would just say that I wish that I had the laundry list or the catalog of contraceptives that the Pop Council has and has been able to make such a good impact in contraception. But our focus has been largely in non-hormonal contraceptives, first for female, and we had an idea for an on-demand non-hormonal female contraceptive, and currently we're moving forward a non-hormonal male contraceptive pill that stops spermatogenesis. Those are the two products that we're really working on.
Great, thank you. And I know that's a really exciting area that very much responds to what we hear from women, especially in low and middle income countries, around the desire for non-hormonal methods. So I wouldn't poo-poo the smaller portfolio because it's got something else going for it. Okay, thank you so much. We will move on to our third panelist, Liz Pruce. Liz is the Vice President of Product Development at Daré Bioscience, a company focused on accelerating innovation in women's health. In this role, Liz is responsible for technical and strategic product development, leading a cross-functional R&D and product development team and key strategic external partners. Liz has more than 26 years of experience in drug delivery science and product development of combination products and medical devices. Thank you so much for being with us today, Liz. Would love to hear a little bit more about Daré and your products.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today, and really excited to be on this panel with such great, product developers and innovators in the women's health space. So yes, I am part of Daré Bioscience, and we are committed to developing products for women across a broad area of indications. So absolutely have products that we're developing in contraception, but we're also focused on vaginal health, excuse me, sexual health, menopause, and fertility. So we've really tried to develop our portfolio and our pipeline to try to address, as many, women's health needs as we can. But specifically with respect to contraception, we have several products in our pipeline that are at different stages of development. So our latest stage asset is also a hormone-free product, which I think is certainly just a really exciting area for all of us to be working in. So we have a product, it's called Ovaprene. It's a monthly intravaginal contraceptive that is currently in a phase 3 study. So that work is well underway, and we're very excited to start looking at that data. And then we also have some products that are in phase 1 or about to start phase 1. So we have biodegradable long-acting contraceptive that would be inserted under the skin. We also have 6 and 12-month injectables. And then lastly, we have another very exciting technology. It's still in preclinical development right now, but it's actually a long-acting, what we call personal contraceptive system. So it's actually a smart implant. So it's an active implantable device that would be delivering a hormone and actually has the ability to be turned on and off wirelessly so that you are able to engage and have your family planning happen without needing to remove that implant. So, I think Daré, again, we're very committed to offering, different options because there's not going to be one contraceptive that's going to be right for every woman.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. It's wonderful to see the breadth of the different products that the panelists are all working on. So really appreciate those introductions. With that, we're going to move on to the main topic of today's discussion, which is around disclosing the exciting milestones in your product development. My first question is for Liz. And it comes with this background that developing a novel contraceptive, as many people on this webinar who could easily be panelists as well know very well, can take many years or even decades, and there are many milestones along the way. So Liz, I'm curious if you could share some of the key milestones that Daré typically chooses to share publicly, and specifically, what are your goals when you share these milestones, and who are the audiences for these public announcements?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that Daré typically shares milestones that are clearly going to demonstrate progress that we're making towards our product approval and ultimately commercialization. So clinically, those will include things like trial initiation, interim data readouts, safety reviews, importantly, trial completion, and then the final results. So, it's really important that we are able to highlight, whether our primary and exploratory objectives were met, and then what that ultimately means for the product moving forward. And then also on the regulatory side, we will communicate any significant interactions that we've had with agencies such as the FDA. So positive guidance on a late stage trial design or new drug application approvals. And then the last thing that I'll note is peer-reviewed publications are also extremely important milestones because they are what will also help us to really advance knowledge in women's health and validate the science behind what we're doing.
Great.
And in terms of our audiences, a big part of Daré and our mission is obviously we're developing these products, but we also want to help educate and really engage with stakeholders on the importance and the value of developing women's health products, because it's an area that, as we all know, is continues to be significantly underfunded. And so we are aiming to show innovation in the field. So scientifically, medically, commercially, these are all very compelling reasons that we should be developing products in the women's health space. And so really the key audiences for us are going to be investors, policymakers, business and scientific partners, and then other foundations that are going to help us, bring these products to market.
Thanks. I'm curious, do you see any drawbacks to announcing any of these milestones, or have you ever kind of regretted sharing any milestones?
Yeah, I'm happy to say that to date, we have not experienced any drawbacks from sharing the progress, but I will say, public disclosure definitely requires resources and a strong commitment to accuracy and integrity. And, we view that transparency, though, as being really essential to all of us collectively, achieving our mission.
Mm-hmm. This is sort of an add-on that I didn't prep you for, but just thinking from what you've just said, I'm just curious, for the different audiences, do you share through different channels and different mediums? Or when we're talking about sharing, are we talking about, press release on the website every time, and through the newswire? Or are there sort of levels of sharing that you have?
Yeah, no, I would say primarily press releases. So yeah, we try to just not have to make things overcomplicated, and just sort of get the message out, and that way it can hopefully reach as many, different audiences as it can.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Okay. Well, we're lucky to have a variety of different types of organizations represented on this panel. And as we were preparing for this discussion, one of the things that we thought through was, different types of product developers and different organizations have different funding sources and different goals. There's different cost benefit calculations when evaluating whether to go public with information. So with that in mind, I wanted to direct my next question to you, Anita. The Population Council is a nonprofit organization with a long history of receiving government and philanthropic funding. I'm curious how this public funding has influenced your decisions around when and how to share information publicly. especially regarding trial results, product timelines, or access strategies in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I would say that being a primarily donor-funded nonprofit organization definitely influences our strategies for what and when we disclose. We not only have to really think about the technical implications, but also public perception, trust, and then ultimately the adoption of the products that we are developing. I would say that there are two main considerations here. One being the transparency to the communities that we're seeking to benefit, and then also meeting the needs of our kind of wide and diverse set of donors. So in terms of the first point, we seek to share information in ways that can build community and public trust, while we have to really carefully balance against the risk of overpromising, which can create unrealistic expectations and ultimately backfire and lead to an erosion of trust if things do not go as planned. We also, given that we are looking for a global population for many of our products, we try to ensure that our global health partners and underserved communities and LMICs are part of the development pipeline and not left behind in the development. And so what we found is that our partners in these communities really appreciate being consulted, especially before, during, and after clinical testing of any product. And this has wide benefits overall because we've seen that this engagement with communities and with policymakers ultimately catalyzes product adoption in many cases. But in terms of the fact that our organization relies heavily on donor funding, this does create a dilemma for us when it comes to patenting strategy, given that applying for public funding is often a somewhat public process. As this group surely knows, patents have a limited lifespan, and so there's an incentive to delaying patenting as long as feasible. But as I mentioned, because going after funding is sometimes a public or partially public process, we are sometimes required to ensure that we file for patents earlier than we may have planned to do if we weren't taking into account the need to apply for funding. So each situation is different, but it's always trying to strike that balance between maximizing public benefit and also minimizing any harm to our competitive strategy.
That's really interesting. I'm curious if that public funding has come with specific reporting or transparency requirements. You mentioned that it often requires being more public, which then can drive you filing for patents sooner. Could you speak a little bit more to what public requirements there are that you have faced and how that has shaped your strategy?
Yeah, I think depending on the donor, there's a certain level of visibility that's required. And donors often like to show that there's measurable progress from the funding that they've given us to justify continued investment. So we've seen that with, for example, some US government funding, they post summaries of funded awards. So we have to be careful about the level of detail. Sometimes that's included there. And then just donors, in the community, it's a small enclosed group. They all speak to each other, and so it's just more and more forms of information, forums where information can be shared, whether intentionally or unintentionally. At the same time, part of our model is relying very heavily on partnerships, and so we also have to make sure that we may be applying for funding from a public donor, but also part of a partnership with a private company. And so we have to take into account, their comfort level with sharing information, because we have to make sure that we don't cause a risk where we ultimately find it hard to attract partners or attract licensees that will get our products to the market, because then that's not in anyone's interest, and including the donors. But we found that open communication and collaboration with our donors often can avoid, these major challenges.
In my kids' school, they do this, like it means connection. Like I feel a big connection because we have that same issue or sort of ongoing thinking at FHI 360 with our private partners as well, and it comes up a lot. So I definitely hear you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll ask a little more about that later, but I want to make sure that we get through some of these other questions. So Akash, YourChoice is developing novel non-hormonal contraceptives, as you told us, that could redefine the category. As a private company navigating early stage innovation, really early, how do you decide when to publicly disclose product details for your organization? Especially when balancing investor interest, IP protection, and potential public health impact in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, actually, I think that I think Liz and Anita kind of both have said much of what is needed to say. I think for me, I always feel the most important uh, point is actually filing IP to protect the basic work that is being done, in particular in contraception. And so, I also previously worked at Berkeley. That is where YourChoice spun out of, but also trying to lock up or at least disclose that IP as close as you can to when you've actually identified a molecule that you hope will go into the clinic, I think is the first disclosure point.
Mm-hmm.
I will say thereafter, from the time that we developed the molecule, there was another point where when the company was formed, the idea was very specific to say we were going to develop contraceptives and focus on non-hormonal contraceptives. And so that was a point where we had to come out and just basically put a flag out and say, this is the vision, this is the idea of what we are doing. And then thereafter, once we had done either the lead identification or we had decided on a lead that we were going to move forward either as the non-hormonal female contraceptive or the non-hormonal male contraceptive, that is when we then went further and said, this is where we are at, this is what we are doing. I will say that as a company, we had decided that we were not going to make or identify a lead molecule or decide to move it into the clinic unless we had compelling data in mice and non-human primates. And that was a decision that was made actually with a lot of help from Diana Blythe, who kind of helped us think through, what species are the most relevant to humans based on, in particular, in contraception. And so while I will say there was a lot of buzz about work that had happened with us in mice. And in my mind, I always thought, like, you don't even know that, there's data in non-human primates, or what has actually made us excited or has actually led us to think that this was exciting. And so I think that there are various stages of what triggers a disclosure. And I think there's a question of disclosure to whom. And I think what is not different from maybe the Pop Council is, private donors are not very different from individual investors within an organization who also have their own hopes and dreams and expectations for what is happening. And I think managing the disclosures of the highs and lows of drug development becomes challenging, but it is a normal part of life. I think it is a bit different from Daré because they not only have to deal with investors, but they have to tell the world whenever something happens, which makes it a bit more challenging. But that is a bit of just how I think about disclosure.
Because they're further along in the process, you mean, because they have a phase 3 trial, or?
Well, that is also true. But I would also say, just as a public company, their disclosure is not just I, for example, for my investors, I can pick up a phone and just have a conversation one-on-one, much of like how I would think a conversation with a donor would occur.
Right.
Whereas I don't know if that is necessarily as easy to do as a public company, which I think is just 3D chess compared to checkers that I'm playing by comparison.
I see Liz smiling, so maybe you've hit on something there. Great, well, thank you. I want to move us along to make sure we have time for audience Q&A. So we've talked a little bit about the differences based on your organization type, whether you're public or private, publicly funded, government funded, privately funded, et cetera. I'm curious also based on product type. So, some products are completely novel, a new API, for example, or new target. Others are tweaks of existing products. And sometimes, it sounds like all of you have dealt with products where there's IP that can be, patented. I'm curious whether any of you have worked with any products where there was no potential for IP protection, maybe because it wasn't, novel in a certain way, and how did that change the calculus, or just any other kind of difference if you've experienced based on the product type? How has that informed your strategy around disclosure? So either one, whether it's related to whether it's IP protection or just some other difference in the product.
I will say I did this for not in contraception, but for COVID. In fact, we had a small molecule that we were planning to repurpose that we as a non-hormonal female contraceptive, and we had pivoted that molecule into a COVID antiviral, and it was a 505(b)(2), so there was no composition of matter IP around the molecule. And I think based on my experience, I would say I don't know if I would ever do a 505(b)(2) willingly again, the way that we had done it, because it poses a lot of challenges. This is my own opinion. I will say Nadia and I also started working on a nutraceutical which had no IP. So I mean, the evolution of how we have repositioned IP in this company is wild, to say the least. But I will say in the 505(b)(2), it was particularly challenging because the amount of protection that you are granted is not necessarily that which is given. In particular, if you're doing oral administration and this is not if you have a better form factor that you could further patent. But for oral administration, it is particularly challenging because the regulatory exclusivity that you're given is 4 years and maybe an additional 6 months if you go for pediatric use, which is very relevant for contraception. But 4.5 years is not sufficient, given that in particular, if you're developing a first-in-class, best-in-class compound, because literally you are going to establish the market, and just as you've established the market, your exclusivity ends. And then what happens? So your peak sales has to occur within 4.5 years. It's a bit challenging. And so if your active is, a very easy form factor, I think it is challenging to do a 505(b)(2). That doesn't mean it should not exist, but you should just go in eyes wide open that there must be additional approaches that you take to seek some sort of protection, either IP or otherwise, to prevent others from using and selling the product otherwise, especially if you're doing all the work to establish the market.
Right. And in those cases, how did that change your communication strategy, where you were aware of those limitations in IP protection? So,
I will say the reason why I thought that 505(b)(2) was particularly helpful in a pandemic is you don't, especially in 2020, I thought the pandemic was going to end in a few weeks. So I was like, do I really need more than 4.5 years worth of protection for a virus that, people were saying was going to end by the end of April? And you're like, okay, well, this is not as important as you might have otherwise thought, which is just crazy to think that was a view that people had at a particular time. But but I think that so in that use case, I think that it was fine. But I think that if we think about, in fact, it did not change how I developed the molecule. It just made me rethink, if I were to do this again, I would try not to do a 505(b)(2) if I did not have to.
Thanks.
But that's just me. That is just me and just who I am and how I was thinking about that experience for myself. No shade to anyone else.
Liz and Anita, do you have any thoughts on how the different types of products inform your communication strategy? Maybe Liz, I think I saw you come off mute first. Sure. So you go ahead and then we'll switch to Anita. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on it already in the discussion, but I mean, I think it does come back to the IP protection, right? And sort of how novel and how much do you need to protect at an early stage. And then, there is a point though where you weigh, kind of the value in making that disclosure, right? Because it is going to allow you to demonstrate organizationally, like that you are making progress, right? And allows you to then engage with others in the kind of women's health ecosystem so that we can actually accelerate development and adoption. So I think that's, there's no exact point when you can make that decision for disclosure. There's a spectrum, and you do have to kind of consider a lot of different variables. But yeah, that's kind of how we approach it.
Thanks. Yeah, Anita.
Maybe thinking about the other side of the spectrum when it's a brand new product, brand new type of product. So, we think it's really important to engage with end users to get feedback on acceptability and on feasibility. But I think especially if it's a new product type. So before investing too much time and effort, we want to hear, if this is going to fit, women or men's needs and preferences. So I think in those cases, sometimes we may be disclosing at least product ideas earlier than later, in order to just kind of guide that early development and steer us clear of areas that may not be the best to go into.
Oh, sorry, I had muted myself. Okay. Let's see. I'm curious, we've talked about this a little bit, about sort of the different partners involved in development and how that affects things. I think it was, Anita, that you talked about, if you have private partners, that there can sometimes be a tension there. So I'm curious whether you want to elaborate on that, or Liz or Akash, if you've seen differences in your strategies based on any collaborators you've had and the wishes. So I'll open that to any of you that wants to jump in.
Again, I'll start. Sorry. But Akash actually already introduced this for me, which is the fact that Daré is a publicly traded company, and how that, we have to meet SEC requirements for reporting. And so that does mean that we are disclosing anything that could be considered material information for investors, for them to make informed decisions. So that does put, it just puts an extra burden on us to, again, have to be thoughtful and accurate and, again, transparent in what we are communicating. And sometimes we don't ultimately have maybe the same choice in disclosure as you might have with a private company, or a nonprofit. But so we just, again, we take that responsibility very seriously, both from the perspective of being able to do right by the investors and the people that are supporting us, but also doing what is right for the company in terms of protection. But again, I think that's where we also try to really leverage press releases to reach a wide network. So that way, again, we are reaching all of those different stakeholders, and it's not necessarily, addressed to a specific region or a specific discipline, but we're just getting the information out there.
My only thoughts are, what a humble comment for the company that has like the major partnership of a novel contraceptive with a large pharma company. And I guess the question of just like what disclosure looks like based on the entity, I think, for our work at YourChoice, originally it was done, the original work was done at UC Berkeley, which as a nonprofit, it does not have the ability to commercialize research. And so in that instance, when you are looking for an external partner in the hopes of commercializing that work, you are limited in what you can do and what you can offer to a partner, and what you are able to disclose, because also you're limited in the non-clinical work that you're going to be doing. I will say, by comparison, in a small biotech company that perhaps does not have limitless cash, in a time when the market is not very fond of biotech companies, it is challenging because you also have to continue to do clinical studies, additional non-clinical studies, additional clinical studies as well, to further an asset. And then ask the best questions that you can in that position and figure out what can you say about the studies that you have done and what does that represent for the molecule that you have moved forward. So I think it is more complex as you continue to move down the chain, but early on, what you can do and how you can partner is very different to what you can do later on.
Right. I think, yeah, Akash and Liz covered, well, the considerations when working with kind of development partners, industry partners. So maybe I'll just add a perspective, working with local partners in communities. And that's where we have to really carefully calibrate the timing of our communications around availability of new products. So that we don't, create expectations that end up not being able to be met, since we all know how unpredictable development can be. So just that we pay special attention kind of to our communications to local partners to make sure that we're not creating those unrealistic expectations.
Can you talk a little bit more about that with the depivarine ring? Like, do you feel like you struck that balance, or is there anything you would have done differently in retrospect?
Yeah, so with that program, we really we involved our local partners all the way from the beginning throughout the program. So it was a big communication effort. We had a lot of support. We had support from also partners that were funded by donors that, we have in the HIV prevention field, there's a lot of effort put towards communication and communication to these communities. And so, we, just like every other program, ran into delays that were unanticipated. So we tried to just be as transparent as possible with communities. But, of course, especially for products like that, communities want products, as fast as possible. And so we're trying to deliver on that. But I think there were a lot of good lessons learned from that process as well. That's helped us, in further developments that we're doing now.
Great, thank you. On that note, I'd like to ask all of you, before we transition to audience Q&A, if you have any advice or lessons learned, if you could sort of advise a new entrant to the field, a new developer, based on your years of experience, what advice would you give? Either pitfalls to avoid or things to definitely do?
I think everyone is going to make mistakes. That's like for sure. But I would say, I think it's very hard to give blanket advice like this. I would say if you're really going to start something new, hit me up. I'm happy to give advice on a real situation rather than a potential one.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Liz or Anita?
Go ahead, Anita.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Liz. Maybe I would just say, there's to be cautious also about disclosing too early. We've had the real situation where patents have expired before we've been able to put products on the market. And I would also just caution about public disclosures and making sure everyone on your team are aligned about the information that can be disclosed and the information that should be kept internal. And having patent specialists really carefully scrutinize disclosures before they go out there, because we've also had situations where our patent strategies have ended up being inoperable because of disclosures that have been made. So we've definitely learned a lot from that. So that's in terms of too early, but in terms of also too late, I would say that we also don't want to wait too late before disclosing information about our efforts, because sometimes you get this key feedback from different stakeholders that can be incorporated into your product before the product design is finalized, and that can be invaluable. So that's just another thing to keep in mind, is you want to get that valuable feedback before it's too late.
Great, thanks. Liz?
Yeah, I would maybe to build off of that as well, I think what makes women's health different than maybe other areas is I think we are all in this together. So the more we can do to share innovation as early as possible, right? Obviously taking all the cautions that Anita just described and making sure that you're protecting your business. But I think that, that's how we're going to be able to drive value and innovation and get these products to women is collectively if we're sharing our learnings, right? And so I think that's the other advice I would give is, don't view it necessarily as just what is going on within your organization. Again, kind of think about the entire ecosystem and kind of what we all are doing together, what our mission is, because there's just huge opportunity there.
Great, thanks to you all. Well, I want to make sure we get some time to answer questions. I think we have one that's in the Q&A box, and then anyone else feel free to type, or once we answer this one, you can also jump in, I think. Actually, I don't know if we're able to get you off of mute or not, but Emily can answer that. But let's go through the first question. So the question is this: the panelists have all noted that doing disclosure well, meaning thoughtfully with appropriate timing to the right people, is resource intensive. How would they recommend that other developers plan for communication activities and ensure they have sufficient human and financial resources to do this work effectively? So resource planning, human and financial resource planning. Any thoughts there? Akash?
Maybe I will build on what Elizabeth said, which is that the women's health space is small and it really is a village. I think that whenever there's a women's health event, you're just like, there's the same like 15 people that I've seen at every conference. And it is almost like, you're like, okay, great. Like what makes this different than a traditional biotech conference? Is like, it's my friends who are dealing with the same problems that I'm dealing with every day. And so in a world where, and I think it is important, if this comment is about women's health or contraception, then my comment here is there's a benefit because those individuals who have helped any of us kind of move forward or communicate what we are doing is going to be well attuned to the women's health space and will be able to help you as well. I think that is maybe very hopeful, but I do think that is true. Like there are a set number of individuals who like know how to help women's health companies kind of communicate, and there are like 5 of them, and they know all of us. They also know who's interested in women's health, because not everyone is, like, shocker, not everyone is interested in women's health, which is a challenge. And my other comment here is the benefit is no one in women's health is particularly rich. Like no one is like sloshing with cash also. So much of the work is actually being, I think the funnest part, and maybe this is just Stockholm syndrome, is like you have all these hopes and dreams, but you don't have the cash. So you just have to be creative. And you're just like, how do I do what I like? I have champagne taste on like 7-Up budget. Like, how do I have this fake view of like making this a reality, really? And I think there is some creativity that is required, but I think the community is small. And if you have questions or if you need particular help, I don't think anyone would say no. And I think that is the other thing, is like there are like 5 people who play in contraception. It is not that like I have not been vulnerable and said like, this is a problem that I have. What are your thoughts in this space? To any of them, or they have seen me present and they know what I'm doing wrong. So I think the space is small and like people are willing to help more than throw you under the bus.
Well, that's great news. And I'm going to quote you on the champagne taste with 7-Up budget. I like that.
And yes, maybe just to add to that, I was going to say, I totally echo the creativity piece of it. We absolutely have to find ways to make, make more with less. And, I think that one of the things that Daré does is, we certainly have our internal resources, but we definitely highly leverage partnerships and consultants in the space, right? There are resources available. And I think if they can help you to, initially build sort of a framework for how you want to manage your disclosures, then you can kind of build off of that. But I also can't stress enough the value in having a very solid legal resource that you really do trust and who understands your business and who understands the stage of your business, right? And is able to kind of adapt and work with you to make sure that you're doing the work that you need to do for the disclosures, as is appropriate.
I also think it's the existence of groups like the CTI Exchange, and there are other ones out there for different health areas and just women's health in general that are happy to amplify your message once you have your message together. So I think relying on those groups, IMPT, GHTC, there's so many out there that are incredibly helpful. It can be really a way to take something that you've created and really make a big noise of it, but not necessarily having to rely on your internal human capital so much once you've kind of got your internal messaging or your external messaging together.
Well, thank you for that plug, Anita. I didn't ask her to say that, by the way, but I would like to emphasize that point that CTI Exchange is here to help you. And in our, Emily mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that we just recently redid the website, and one area that's new is there's an expert database. So this is also a call. If anyone wants to offer more advice, you can let us know. And I think there's in the chat some ways to reach us that you would like to participate and be listed. And on the other end, if you're looking for advice, you'll see contact information. A lot of folks have chosen to very graciously put their information out there, or if not, some people have said they feel more comfortable with us making the connection. So please do feel free to reach out to us to help facilitate those connections and discussions. And if you have ideas for future webinars or questions that would help you in your business, we're always here to help strengthen this community. We really appreciate these conversations like this. And with that, it looks like there are no more questions. Is that right, Emily?
That's right.
Okay. With that, I would like to thank you all for this wonderful conversation today. I've really appreciated getting to learn more about each of your organizations and products, and to hear your really open and thoughtful responses to how you think about this question of what to disclose and when, and the different factors that shape the answers to that question. So thank you again to all of you. Thank you to everybody who has joined. Thank you especially to Emily and Nat, who organized this webinar and did all of the legwork behind the scenes. And we will, as always, be making a recording available of this webinar, and that'll be sent out to everyone who registered and available through our website. So thanks again to all, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your day, no matter how much of it is left. And we will see you in the future space, virtual or in person. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.